Today in the studio, I'm going to be working on this really cute springtime tulip quilt. I've done a ton of pre-marking. I'm going to be cross-hatching the entire background, so it's going to go quite slowly. It was made by Monette in Kamloops, British Columbia, so let's go stitch. There are timestamps in the timeline of this video if you want to skip around to your favorite part. So with this big, beautiful springtime style quilt, I knew I had to do a big flowing feather in this border. When I do this style of feather, I do have some key markings that I use. As you can see, I've drawn the spine for this feather. I've also drawn a couple of plumes down below, and I'm going to use those to match up to the beginning of the feather when I come all the way around the quilt. And I've also marked on the left-hand side here about a ½ an inch in, and this is just a reminder to me not to bring the feathers all the way to the edge of the quilt. And I do this so that if somebody has to trim the quilt or when they add on their binding, they're not going to cut off the design. This is my favorite style of feather to use in a border or sashing situation because you don't have to stitch the entire spine out at once. As you can see, I just kind of bump along my drawn line, then I stitch that spine in and then bump along the other way as I progress through the feather. I do take a lot of time measuring and marking these feathers before I start stitching, so I get a nice flowing symmetrical feather along the borders. Feathers are such an interesting design because it's kind of like handwriting. Everybody's looks a little bit different. I've done a ton of different feather designs in my career so far, but I always come back to the classic bump back feather. And for this quilt in particular, I wanted that classic style feather because, as you might have noticed, there is a ton of cross-hatching in the background of this quilt because I'm going to be cross-hatching the entire thing. I think these two traditional sort of designs go really well together. There are a ton of videos and classes to help you develop your feather skills, but in my opinion, the best way to develop your feathering skills is to just be stitching them. I would encourage anyone who wants to learn feathers to get out there and just start stitching. So after I finish up this feathered area, I'm going to stitch back in the ditch all the way along. I think that stitching in the ditch really does make a better quilt, and I make sure to always do it on my custom jobs. In my opinion, a quilt just looks better with those seams stitched down, and I think it lays better too. And it's a really good skill to have if you're going to be custom quilting for customers or your own home or show quilts. It's a really great skill to always be working on because it always takes that custom quilting just another level up. I wanted to leave these triangles unquilted for texture, and there was a wide variety of colors in these fabrics, and I didn't want to be changing thread color and breaking threads so often. Plus, I already had a huge job ahead of me, as you can see from the cross-hatching lines below. Instead, I opted for some mid-density matchstick quilting just to highlight that I didn't quilt them on purpose. And then it was time to go on to this crosshatch background stitching. As you can clearly see, I have marked every single line on this gigantic quilt. Is it overkill? No, it's not overkill. If you're going to be stitching a huge space like this using cross-hatching, you're going to want to pre-mark this because it's so easy to get off track by just lining up one line wrong. It throws all the lines off and you are in a world of mess. Did it take me 4 hours to mark all of these lines? Yes, probably. It probably did. But I was okay with that because I was listening to some podcasts. One of my favorite podcasts right now is Science Versus. I'm going to link that one below. It's a good one. If you have a favorite podcast, could you drop me a comment because I'm always looking for more podcasts. Now you'll notice that I am not stitching this out in any sort of structured fashion. I am literally just traveling to the next line that I am closest to and then stitching that one out, traveling, stitching. There is no rhyme or reason to it. But because I have spent all of this time marking them out, I can just give her. It's like prepping a room for paint. It takes a long time to tape everything off, but you get a better result in the end and ultimately end up saving time. I've also mounted this quilt horizontally as opposed to vertically, and I did this because the throat space on my machine actually isn't really that big. I have only about 15 inches of workable space on my custom machine once I have my ruler plate on. So by mounting it horizontally, I was able to work on an entire tulip block at the same time. Also, I'm able to complete a larger swath of crosshatch at a single time. I do remember that when I reached the end of the first row, I kind of had an idea about how it was working really well, and it got easier as I progressed row by row, but I could not tell you what that is anymore. I usually find the perfect thread path of a quilt by about the end row, so I've completely given up on that as a problem. I just break thread and go to where I need to go, and I don't waste any time thinking about it. When I stitch myself into a corner, I just break thread, take a look at what isn't quilted, and start going again. You can waste hours trying to find the perfect path. My rule is if it takes longer to make a decision than it does to break thread, then I just need to break thread and move on. As you get more and more experience, you'll see your paths easier and easier. Remember, this is a skill, not a talent, so you can learn it. Once I reach the end of the row, I go back and catch all the lines I might have missed along the way, and I also make sure that I've stitched all the way around all of the tulip blocks in the ditch. I'm going to be coming back to these after I finish the crosshatch because the blocks aren't that big and I can roll them up onto my take-up bar with no problems and without having to baste them. As I progress down the quilt, I am continuing to stitch out this flowing feather down the right-hand side of my quilt. I always seem to run my feathers this way. I don't know why, but it's just the way I seem to do it. I'm basting the left-hand side of the quilt using some pins just to hold everything in place as I progress, because I'm going to run that feather across the bottom of the quilt and then come back up that side to connect it to the beginning later on. As I approach the join for the feather, I take note of my registration plumes and make everything fit seamlessly. I decided to quilt all of the tulip blocks exactly the same. I loved Monette's fabric choices and the way she laid them out, so I wanted that to really be the star of the show. So by quilting all the blocks the same, I'm able to make the quilting kind of fall into the background a little bit. So I'm just gonna keep the quilting fairly simple. I start with a petal shape in the center of the tulip blossom. I'm using the Quilted Pineapple 15 for this. And then I add half a feather to one side of this petal shape. And I use that same density matchstick design down the center of the petal and put another feather up the other side. I decided to do another sort of traditional design in the stem of the feather, so here I just did a straightforward ribbon candy. As a final detail, I put in another half feather into the tulip leaves. This is the one place where I have to break thread on this block and get that other feather in that leaf. A quick heads up, I am going to be having a sale in February 2025 on my Modern Quilting with Rulers course. So if you want to be in the know on that, you might want to hop in on the email list to get the best deal. The link is in the description. And that's it. All the details have been revealed. Make sure to check out my other watch and learn videos. I'm going to play out some more quilting footage here just for those people who like to watch it in real time, but make sure to hop to the end of the video to see the full reveal of the quilt. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.